What do you do when the monster you're running from hunts you down only when you're asleep? Only when you're at your most vulnerable self, when you can't defend yourself and you're trapped in a nightmare which is ruled and controlled by this monster. Well, in most cases, you end up pretty dead. Now, this monster is, of course, Freddy Krueger, the Springwood Slasher, the Dream Master and King of Nightmares. And in this video, I'll take you through the entire history of Freddy Charles Krueger. So, without further ado, let's get this ride started. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. Now, this is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How was Freddy Krueger conceived? Ever wonder where Wes Craven got the nightmare fuel for A Nightmare on Elm Street? Well, turns out the chilling film was brewed from some real-life horrors that haunted Craven himself. Back in the early 80s, after wrapping up Swamp Thing, Craven was on the hunt for his next big idea. He stumbled upon a story in the Los Angeles Times that shook him to the core. The article told of a family who had fled the killing fields of Cambodia to find safety in the US. Their young son was tormented by horrific nightmares and was so terrified to sleep that he tried staying awake for days on end. When he finally slept, his parents thought the worst was over. But then came the screams. By the time they reached him, the boy was dead, right in the middle of his nightmare. This tragic tale lit a spark in Craven's mind. As he put it, here was a youngster having a vision of a horror that everyone older was denying. That became the central line of Nightmare on Elm Street. But a killer concept needs a killer villain, right? Enter Freddy Krueger. To craft this iconic bad guy, Craven dug deep into his own past. One spooky night in Cleveland, a young Craven peeked out his apartment window and spotted a creepy dude strolling down the street wearing a fedora. Yeah, the same hat Freddy loves to sport. The man stopped and locked eyes with him, staring intensely. Freaked out, Craven ducked away, but when he glanced back, the guy was still there, staring up like something out of a horror flick. The nightmare didn't end there. The man started heading toward the entrance of Craven's building. Hearing footsteps on the stairs, Craven's older brother grabbed a baseball bat, ready to face whatever was coming. But when they checked, the mysterious man had vanished into thin air. This eerie encounter left a mark on Craven, so much so that it helped shape the sinister character of Freddy. And wait till you hear this. Freddy's name wasn't just plucked out of thin air. It actually came from a childhood bully who made Craven's life miserable. Talk about sweet revenge. Combining the terrifying memory of the stranger and the torment from his bully, Craven molded a villain that would haunt audiences for generations. The concept of a dream killer was also heavily influenced by the Cambodian boy story. The idea that nightmares could be deadly and that adults might dismiss the fears of the young. Craven wove all these threads together to create a story that tapped into primal fears. That sometimes what goes bump in the night isn't just in our heads. So, next time you watch Freddy terrorize teens in their sleep, remember that his origins are rooted in real-life frights that gave Craven the creeps. Now that we've explored what went behind Freddy's conception, let's dive into what we assembled here for the entire sinister life of Freddy Krueger. Freddy's birth, the progeny of 100 maniacs. So, we know it pretty well that Freddy Krueger turned out to be everyone's worst nightmare. But how did it happen? What went so wrong with Freddy that he became what he became? And you know what? The answer dates back to his very birth, his very conception into his mother's womb. So, let's break it down and see how Freddy became the progeny of 100 maniacs. The story dates to Springwood, Ohio, back in 1907. A sweet girl named Amanda Krueger is born. 18 years later, this young woman decides that she wants to devote her life to faith by becoming a nun, a bride of Christ, if you will. She starts working at Hadaway House, also known as the Westin Hills Asylum, which was basically a place that housed all kinds of crazies. But since she was a part of a horror story, things naturally took a grim and evil turn one evening in December 1942. In the staff's rush to head home, they accidentally lock Amanda inside a room with 100 of the asylum's most dangerous inmates. Tragically, Amanda is attacked throughout the night. She's abused and assaulted in every sense of the terms. When she's found, she's barely alive. Months later, she gives birth to a son, Frederick Charles Krueger, or Freddy for short, our good old Freddy, born from the seed of maniacs. Unable to raise him herself, Freddy is placed with Mr. Underwood, an alcoholic who's anything but fatherly. So, for young Freddy, it was like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Freddy's childhood is a total train wreck. By elementary school, he was already showing some seriously messed up behavior. He He kills the class hamster without a hint of remorse. To make matters worse, his classmates bully him relentlessly, calling him the son of 100 maniacs. Not exactly playground banter. Living with an abusive guardian and tormented at school, Freddy starts to spiral. He begins harming himself with a shaving razor, but he seems to enjoy it. Things reach a boiling point when he uses that same razor on Mr. Underwood. In a mix of self-defense and pent-up revenge, Freddy ends his adoptive father's life. Well, given the abuse he's endured, it's not entirely shocking. So it's safe to say that Freddy's upbringing was nothing short of a horror show. From his grim origin to his brutal childhood, every chapter of his life is steeped in darkness. It's no surprise he grows up to become a figure who haunts dreams and sends chills down spines. Freddy as an adult, the embodiment of evil and sin. So, as an adult, Freddy Krueger seemed like your typical guy working at the local power plant. I mean, that's usually the case with serial killers, right? They're all charming and handsome and look like an eligible bachelor. Well, just look at guys like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. But deep down, these people have a face that even the deadliest of demons would think twice before staring at. Likewise, Freddy also had a loving wife and even raised a daughter. But behind that normal facade, he was seething with a desire for revenge against Springwood, the town that had made his life miserable. And to quench this thirst for revenge, Freddy targeted the children of his former classmates, who were now the townsfolk of Springwood. He'd lure these kids to the boiler room at his workplace. He, of course, had a creepy glove with fish knives attached to the fingers, turning it into a deadly weapon. Interestingly, Wes Craven got the idea for these knives for finger things from his pet cat, which he once saw clawing its, claws. So, anyway, using this glove, he kidnapped, tortured, and mutilated his victims. After his gruesome deeds, he'd scatter their remains throughout the town. These horrifying acts earned him the nickname the Springwood Slasher. He managed to kill around 20 children before the law caught up with him. Freddy was arrested, and it seemed like justice would finally be served. But to the dismay of the townsfolk, the law enforcement justice wasn't served to Freddy. Not yet. Due to a technicality, the arrest warrant was signed in the wrong place, and the judge overseeing the case was drunk, so Freddy walked free. The townspeople were absolutely livid. Feeling betrayed by the justice system, they decided to take matters into their own hands. A mob formed, and they tracked Freddy down to his lair at the power plant. Cornering him, they doused him in gasoline and set the place ablaze, leaving him to burn. As the flames consumed him and the building, something supernatural went down. Freddy was approached by dream demons who offered him a sinister deal. They promised he could continue his killing spree, but this time in the dream world. Eager for more vengeance, Freddy took them up on it. Now armed with new powers, Freddy could invade people's dreams and turn them into deadly nightmares. Any harm he caused in the dream world resulted in real-life death. This made him an even more terrifying force to reckon with. The line between reality and dreams blurred for his victims, and Freddy reveled in every moment of their fear. So, that's how Freddy Krueger transformed from a vengeful man into a nightmare-inducing entity. His dark past and heinous actions led him down a path that turned him into the stuff of nightmares. Literally. And now, with his new supernatural abilities, he's more dangerous than ever, turning sweet dreams into deadly realities. Now, on to the next section of the video where we talk about what went on in the movies. And after we've explored the movies, we dive into the comics, like Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, etc., etc. So, let's get started with Wes Craven's original. Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. The movie starts off with a super weird scene. Some mysterious guy is busy making a glove fitted with sharp knife-like fingers. Back when the movie was first released, people didn't know who this guy was, but we do. We only see his hands, but it's clear that nothing good can come out of a pair of gloves that has knives attached to them. Then we cut to Tina, a girl in a nightgown, sprinting through eerie, steam-filled alleys that scream bad news. Suddenly, the strange man lunges at her with his gloves. She lets out a scream and jolts awake in her bed. It was just a nightmare. Or was it? Her mum rushes in after hearing her scream. They notice that Tina's nightgown is slashed near her stomach, and the tears in the gown match the cuts that would have been made by the glove from her dream. Creepy? Much? The next morning at school, Tina talks with her friends, her boyfriend Rod, her best friend Nancy, and Nancy's boyfriend Glenn. Tina and Nancy realize they've both been having nightmares about the same creepy guy. Rod and Glenn play it cool, but you can't tell something's up with them too. That night, with Tina's mum out of town, Nancy and Glenn decide to crash at Tina's place to keep her company. Rod shows up uninvited and scares them by making weird noises outside before revealing himself. He and Tina head upstairs and get a little cozy. Meanwhile, Nancy and Glenn stay downstairs. Nancy isn't in the mood for any shenanigans. As everyone drifts off, strange things start happening. Above Nancy's bed, the wall seems to warp, and a human-like figure presses through it. She doesn't notice because she's half asleep, and when she fully wakes up, it's gone. In Tina's room, she's awakened by the sound of pebbles hitting her window. Someone's outside messing around. Thinking it's the creep from her nightmares, she goes outside to confront whoever it is. Not the best idea. She ends up back in that spooky alley from her dream. Weird stuff keeps continuing. A random goat appears, and then the fedora-wearing guy with the knife glove shows up. He taunts her, whispering her name, and stretches his arms unnaturally wide to block her path. He even slices off his own fingers, and some bizarre colored blood oozes out. Tina tries to make a run for it back to the house, but the guy catches her. In reality, she's thrashing around in bed next to Rod. He wakes up to see her struggling against some invisible force. Suddenly, 4 deep slashes appear on her stomach as if made by those knife fingers. She's dragged, screaming up the wall and across the ceiling, and then drops back onto the bed, dead and drenched in blood. Nancy and Glenn burst into the room to find Tina's lifeless body and Rod nowhere to be seen. Looks like he bailed through the window. The whole scene is beyond messed up, leaving everyone freaked out and clueless about what's real and what's just a nightmare. Nancy finds herself at the police station where she tells everything to Lieutenant Donald Thompson, who also happens to be her dad. Her divorced parents exchange icy glares. Everyone thinks Rod is the killer, but Nancy isn't convinced. Sure, he's a bit of a troublemaker, but a murderer? She doesn't think so. The next morning, on her way to school, Rod jumps out and pulls Nancy into the bushes. He swears he didn't kill Tina. Before they can chat more, Nancy's dad and his squad roll up and arrest Rod. Feeling betrayed that her own father used her as bait, Nancy storms off, seriously peeved, and for good reason. Anyway, later in class, sleep-deprived Nancy sleeps. Big mistake. She spots Tina outside the classroom door, wrapped in a bloody body bag. The bag gets dragged away by an unseen force. Nancy, being the curious cat she is, follows the trail to the basement. Along the way, a hall monitor morphs into the knife-glove-wielding freak from her nightmares. Down in the boiler room, the scarred man corners her, taunting, "Come to Freddy." Just as he's about to strike, she burns her arm on a hot pipe, jolting herself awake. Back in reality, she's got a legit burn mark on her arm. Shaken, she leaves from school and visits Rod in jail. Guess what? He's been dreaming about the same dude from the dreams. Nancy assures him she knows he's innocent and leaves, more determined than ever to uncover the truth. That night, Nancy tries to relax with a soothing bath. She again falls asleep and gets pulled underwater into some abyss-like nightmare. She fights her way back to the surface, gasping for air. Her mum, Marge, bursts in after hearing the commotion. Nancy brushes it off and pretends she just slipped. Mum did quite give in to Nancy's story, but sent her to bed anyway. Determined to stay awake, Nancy starts guzzling coffee and even hides a fresh pot in her room. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Enlisting her boyfriend Glenn's help, Nancy plans an experiment. She asks him to watch over her while she sleeps and wake her if things get sketchy. In her dream, she heads to the jail to check on Rod. She sees the killer walk right through the bars of Rod's cell. Panicking, she calls for Glenn, but he's nowhere to be found. Instead, the killer sneers, "I'm here, Nancy," and chases her back home. As she tries to escape, her stairs turn into a sticky mess, slowing her down. The killer smashes through her front door, wearing Tina's face like a mask and mocking her with Tina's voice. "Nancy, save me from Freddy," he taunts. Nancy wakes up, furious to find Glenn sleeping on the job. Seriously, dude, you had one job. She's now more isolated than ever, with a nightmare that won't quit and friends who can't stay awake. The line between dream and reality is blurring, and Nancy's running out of options. How do you fight a killer who attacks when you close your eyes? Nancy and Glenn rush to the jail, convinced that Fred is about to make his next move on Rod. Just as they feared, Rod meets the Grim Reaper when an invisible force twists his bedsheets into a noose, hanging him in his cell. To everyone else, it looks like a suicide, but Nancy knows something wicked is at play. Her dad, Lieutenant Thompson, and her mum Marge seem skeptical about her dream killer theory, but there's a vibe they might be hiding something. In a bid to get to the bottom of things, Marge takes Nancy to a sleep clinic. While she's sleeping, Nancy's nightmare sends the monitors haywire. She wakes up with a sudden grey streak in her hair, and weirdly enough, she was holding a fedora she snatched from her dream. Inside the hat is the name Fred Krueger. When Nancy confronts her mum, Marge plays dumb and denies any knowledge of this mysterious dude. Not believing her, Nancy talks to Glenn about controlling dreams. He mentions that some Zen masters can turn their backs on nightmares to make them vanish. He's surprised she's taking this so seriously, especially since she's also been reading books about booby traps and survival tactics. Finally, Marge comes to the children with the truth, the dark truth. She takes Nancy to the basement and tells her about Fred Krueger, who he was and how he was killed by a mob. As proof, Marge shows Nancy Freddy's creepy glove which she kept in the furnace. Nancy realizes Freddy is back with a vengeance and was picking off the kids in their dreams. Desperate to save Glenn, Nancy tries to warn him, but his folks block her calls. Then she gets a freaky phone call from Freddy, who taunts her even after she detaches the phone out of the wall. Locked in her own house with bars on the windows, thanks, Mum, she can't reach Glenn. Of course, Glenn sleeps and gets sucked into his bed, which basically leads to an explosion of blood that paints his entire room. With everyone else gone, Nancy knows it's down to her. She calls her dad and tells him straight up she's going after Freddy in her dreams and plans to pull him into the real world. She asks him to be there to arrest the guy when she does. Lieutenant Thompson thinks she's off her rocker, but humors her, hoping she'll finally get some shut-eye. Armed with newfound determination and a serious grudge, Nancy gears up for the ultimate face-off. She rigs her house with a bunch of booby traps. After saying goodnight to her mum, who's had a bit too much to drink, Nancy sleeps and enters the dream world. She heads into her basement and discovers a door that wasn't there before. Curious, she goes through it and descends deeper and deeper until she ends up in Freddy's creepy boiler room. Time's ticking because her alarm is about to go off and Freddy is MIA. Just when she's about to lose hope, he attacks. They scuffle and suddenly they're outside her house. Her plan works. As the alarm rings, she pulls Freddy into the real world with her. Now, in reality, Freddy's caught off guard. Nancy's booby traps start working like a charm, giving her the upper hand. She tries to get her dad's attention, but the cop he posted outside is totally clueless. Freddy chases her through the house and they end up back in the basement. Thinking on her feet, Nancy sets him on fire. Her dad, Lieutenant Thompson, finally breaks into the house. They notice fiery footprints leading upstairs. Super creepy. Following the trail, they find Freddy struggling with Nancy's mom, Marge, in her bed. When they pull back the covers, Freddy has vanished and Marge is a charred corpse that suddenly disappears into the bed. Lieutenant Thompson is stunned. Nancy keeps her cool. She asks to be left alone for a moment. Once her dad leaves, Freddy emerges again. Remembering Glenn's advice about not giving power to nightmares, Nancy turns her back on Freddy. She tells him he's nothing to her. He tries to attack, but her lack of fear makes him fade away into nothingness. Feeling victorious, Nancy steps out of the bedroom and suddenly finds herself outside, dressed for school. Her mom's on the porch, acting all cheerful and saying she's gonna quit drinking. Glenn, Rod and Tina pull up in Glenn's car to give her a ride. Everything seems peachy until Nancy gets into the car. Out of nowhere, the convertible top slams shut and it's striped in Freddy's signature red and green colors. The windows roll up and the car takes off on its own, trapping all of them inside. Marge waves goodbye, oblivious to what's happening. Then, Freddy's arm smashes through the small window on the front door. He grabs Marge and pulls her right through the tiny opening. She's gone in a flash. And that's where the first movie ends. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Freddy's Revenge, 1985. So, the story starts with a school bus cruising through Springwood. As some teens hop off, we notice the bus driver looks just like Freddy Krueger before he became the stuff of nightmares. The bus rolls on with only Jessie Walsh and two girls left aboard. Suddenly, the driver skips a stop, ignoring one girl's calls that it's hers. The sky darkens quite mysteriously, and the driver, now clearly Freddy, speeds off the road. The ground crumbles beneath them, and the bus ends up teetering over a massive chasm with lightning flashing below. Freddy starts approaching the terrified teens, his bladed glove shining and stuff as he moves in for the kill. Just when things couldn't get crazier, we cut to Jessie's mom, Cheryl Walsh, casually slicing tomatoes in the kitchen. Jessie's blood-curdling screams echo through the house, which his sister Angela hears. He comes downstairs, visibly shaken, just as the doorbell rings. It's Lisa, his friend. They hop into his car and head out. Well, he was just trying to shake off whatever eerie stuff he just experienced. At school, Jesse's day goes from bad to worse. He gets into a scuffle with Ron Grady during gym class. Both of them end up punished by their strict gym teacher, Mr. Schneider, who's got a bit of a reputation among the students. Grady hints at some rumors about Schneider's after-hours activities. When Jesse mentions his new house, Grady fills him in on its creepy history. Apparently, Nancy Thompson once lived there and went off the deep end after witnessing her boyfriend Glenn get brutally killed across the street. That night, Jesse has another unsettling dream. He wanders outside and peeks into his basement window, only to spot Freddy retrieving his infamous glove from the furnace. Re-entering the house, Jesse comes face to face with Freddy himself. Freddy tells him they've got special work to do together and says that Jesse has the body while he has the brains. So, yeah, Jesse's reality is spiraling out of control. His dreams are invaded by Freddy, and now even his waking hours are filled with fear and confusion. The lines between dream and reality are blurring, and he can't seem to catch a break. Anyway, later, Jesse and Lisa stumble upon Nancy Thompson's old diary hidden away, detailing her creepy experiences with Freddy Krueger. Jesse starts connecting the dots and soon recognizes Freddy from his own dreams. That night, Jesse wakes up to find his room overheating and his belongings melting. He ends up in the basement where he finds Freddy's glove in the furnace. Freddy appears and tries to coax Jesse into using the glove, saying they've got some special work to do. The next day, Jesse learns that Lisa was gonna throw a party and lends her the diary. But things at home get freaky. The house is boiling hot, like 97 degrees, and their pet parakeets start acting up. One bird kills the other, then attacks Jesse's dad before exploding into flames. Yeah, you heard that right. His dad accuses Jesse of messing around with firecrackers, but Jesse's had enough and storms out. Wandering aimlessly, Jesse ends up at a shady bar called Don's Place. He orders a beer, but is caught by Coach Schneider, who seems a little too pleased to see him. Next thing Jesse knows, he's at the school gym, forced to run laps as punishment. Afterward, Schneider tells him to hit the showers. Things get even stranger when sports equipment starts flying off the shelves and jump ropes tie Schneider to the shower fixtures. Freddy takes over Jesse's body. Jesse watches in horror as his own hands morph into Freddy's, complete with knives for fingers. Unable to control himself, he, now as Freddy, attacks and kills Schneider, slashing him multiple times. Next thing we know, Jesse transforms back and finds himself holding the deadly glove. Later, the cops find Jesse wandering the streets naked and bring him home. His dad accuses him of being on drugs, but his mum steps in and takes him to bed. Jesse starts doubting what's real and what's a nightmare. The next day, he and Lisa arrive at school only to discover that Coach Schneider was murdered for real. Jesse is freaking out as he's fully aware that his nightmares are turning into reality. Later, Jesse opens up to Lisa about Coach Schneider's death, but she insists it was just a bad dream. However, Lisa digs into Freddy Krueger's history and takes Jesse to the infamous boiler room where Freddy tormented his victims, hoping it'll trigger some psychic insight. That night, Freddy almost makes Jesse harm his little sister, which means that no one's really out of danger, especially the kids. At school, Grady and Lisa try to help him out. Ron mentions he's grounded for, throwing his grandma down the stairs. You heard that right. So, he'll miss Lisa's pool party. At the party, Jesse and Lisa were like this close to hooking up, but then Freddy starts taking over and Jesse freaks out. He leaves Lisa, which in turn leaves her totally baffled. Desperate, Jesse heads to Ron's place and begs him to watch over him while he sleeps. Once Jesse sleeps, Freddy hijacks his body again and kills Ron. Shaken, Jesse returns to Lisa's house, where Freddy sees control once more and attacks Lisa before going on a killing spree at the pool party. He takes out 6 guests. Some get boiled alive in the pool, others burned or stabbed. Total chaos. Lisa's dad tries to shoot Freddy, but she stops him, hoping she can still save Jesse. She chases Freddy to the old power plant where he used to work. Outside the plant, Lisa encounters some freaky dogs with human faces. No clue what's up with that. Inside, she runs into a mutant cat and rat, equally unexplained. She finally confronts Freddy and urges Jesse to fight back from within. Freddy starts losing his grip. An old wound reopens and he starts bleeding. Lisa understood that Jesse was fighting back and kissed Freddy. This gives Jesse the strength to ignite a fire from within, burning Freddy to ashes. Jesse emerges from the charred remains, finally free. Now, to what seems like the next day. Jesse boards the school bus with Lisa and their friend Kerry. He's a bit jittery, thinking the bus is going too fast, but it stops to pick up another passenger. False alarm. Right. Just when everything feels normal, Freddy's knife-gloved hand bursts through Kerry while the bus speeds off into the desert. Whether this is reality or another nightmare is anyone's guess, as Jesse's tale wraps up here. Phew, that was quite thrilling. But now, on to the next one. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. 1987. So, the story starts with Kristen Parker, a teenage girl who's desperately trying to stay awake. She's munching on coffee straight from the jar and chugging cola while building a paper-mache model of 1428 Elm Street, the creepy house that's been haunting her nightmares. Her mum barges in, annoyed that Kristen's still up, and mentions she's been seeing a therapist for these bad dreams. After a brief exchange, Mom heads back to her guest, leaving Kristen to finally drift off. In her dream, Kristen finds herself outside the ominous Elm Street house. Kids are playing and singing that eerie Freddy rhyme while jumping rope. She spots a little girl on a red tricycle who leads her into the house. The girl ominously says, This is where he takes us, and Freddy's home. As they venture inside, things get seriously freaky. Kristen hears Freddy's infamous blade scrape and the boiler fires up. Suddenly, Kristen's chased by Freddy Krueger himself. She grabs the little girl to protect her, but the girl turns into a decaying corpse. Kristen screams and thinks she wakes up, but it's a false awakening. She heads to the bathroom, only to have the faucets morph into hands that grab her. Freddy appears in the mirror, and the faucet hand slashes her wrist. Her mum bursts in to find Kristen clutching a razor blade, bleeding from her wrist, before Kristen passes out. Next, we're at Western Hills Psychiatric Hospital. Dr. Gordon and Max, the orderly, discuss a spike in teen suicides, all kids dealing with sleep disorders and terrifying nightmares. Enter Nancy, who previously battled Freddy. She calms Kristen during a meltdown by finishing the Freddy rhyme, showing she knows exactly what's up. Nancy and Dr. Gordon chat about the kids' shared nightmares. He mentions a boy who cut off his own eyelids to avoid sleeping. Nancy drops her purse, revealing she's on Hypnosil, a drug for suppressing dreams. Dr. Gordon notices but doesn't push it. Later, Nancy visits Kristen's home and spots the model of the Elm Street house. Alarm bells ring. Freddy's definitely back. Meanwhile, Kristen sleeps again and dreams she's back in the spooky house. A roasted pig on the table lunges at her. Totally gross. Then, a giant snake with Freddy's face bursts through the floor and starts swallowing her whole. Desperate, Kristen screams for Nancy. Across town, Nancy hears Kristen's cries and somehow enters the dream. She stabs the snake Freddy in the eye, causing him to drop Kristen. Freddy recognizes Nancy and hisses, "You!" They make a narrow escape as Freddy tries to break through a door. Kristen manages to pull them both out of the dream, just in the nick of time. Back in the real world, Nancy wakes up with a cut on her hand, a nasty souvenir from the dream world. She realizes Freddy is back and targeting these kids. Determined to stop him, she knows they have to face Freddy head-on before more teens fall victim to his deadly games. Nancy brings a model of her old Elm Street house to Kristen, a teen who's been dreaming about the same creepy place. Turns out, Nancy used to live there. She asks Kristen if she's ever pulled anyone into her dreams. Kristen admits she used to bring her dad into her nightmares when things got spooky. In group therapy, the kids introduce themselves. They've all been having messed up dreams about a scarred guy with knives for fingers, Freddy Krueger. Nancy reveals that Freddy was a child murderer who got off on a technicality. The local parents, not too happy about that, took justice into their own hands and roasted him alive. Now, Freddy's back for revenge, slicing and dicing in the dream world. The teens are skeptical at first, but realize they're all dreaming about the same freak show. Nancy suggests they harness their own dream powers to fight back. But Freddy's not waiting around. He turns Philip into a human puppet, using his veins like strings, and makes him walk off a building. The authorities call it suicide, but the kids know better. Next, Jennifer meets a grim end when Freddy smashes her head into a TV, quipping, "Welcome to primetime, bitch." Classic Freddy. The staff think it's another self-inflicted tragedy, but the group's freaking out. Nancy and Dr. Gordon decide to use Hypnosil to suppress the kids' dreams, but their boss isn't on board with the plan. Dr. Gordon bumps into a mysterious nun who hints that Freddy's evil spirit needs to be laid to rest. Taking matters into their own hands, Nancy and the gang decide to face Freddy head-on. They use group hypnosis to enter the dream world together, aiming to unleash their inner dream warriors. Kristen is key, since she can pull others into her dreams. As they prepare for the ultimate fight, Freddy's gearing up too, ready to pick them off one by one. The line between dream and reality is getting blurrier than ever. It's a race against time to stop Freddy before he turns their nightmares into a permanent reality. Nancy and her friends decide it's time to face Freddy Krueger head-on in the dream world. They all gather, and at first it seems like nothing's changed. They're still in the same room. Then Joey, one of the teens, wanders off after spotting a nurse he's sweet on. She flirts with him, saying she thinks he's super cute and wanted some alone time. Meanwhile, Dr. Gordon triggers a device, and suddenly objects start floating around the room. That's when they realize they're dreaming. The kids discover they have special abilities in their dreams. Will, usually confined to a wheelchair, can walk and calls himself the Wizard Master, showing off some magic skills. Kristen busts out some killer gymnastics moves. Kincaid has super strength, and Taryn claims she's beautiful and bad, rocking a punk look that, let's just say, it's an acquired taste. Back to Joey and the nurse. Things get steamy until she turns into Freddy. Yep, plot twist. She binds Joey with creepy tongue-like ropes and suspends him over a fiery pit. Freddy chuckles, feeling tongue-tied. Classic nightmare fuel. The rest of the group senses something's off. The room morphs into Freddy's infamous boiler room and panic sets in. Just then, the hospital staff interrupts the session. Joey's found in a coma-like state and the blame game begins. Nancy and Dr. Gordon get the boot, suspended for their unconventional methods. As Dr. Gordon packs up, he spots the mysterious nun again. She reveals that the hospital once housed criminally insane patients, and a young girl, Amanda Krueger, was locked in with them over the holidays. After enduring horrific abuse, she gave birth to none other than Freddy Krueger. The nun tells Dr. Gordon the only way to stop Freddy is to find his remains and bury them on sacred ground. Nancy visits comatose Joey and demands Freddy release him. Suddenly, the words, "Come and get him, bitch," carve themselves into Joey's chest. Nancy's ready to re-enter the dream world for a battle, but Dr. Gordon suggests they try Plan B, lay Freddy's bones to rest. Only snag is, the only person who knows where they're buried is Nancy's estranged dad. They track him down at a bar, but he's not exactly Father of the Year and refuses to help. Dr. Gordon isn't having it. He confronts Nancy's dad and convinces him to tell everything. While Nancy heads back to the hospital to gather the remaining dream warriors, Dr. Gordon and her dad gear up with holy water and a crucifix. Time to ghostbust Freddy's remains. In the dream world, Kristen finds herself back in her bedroom, reliving the night she almost died. This time, Freddy crashes the party, gruesomely dispatching her mum. Kristen uses her acrobatics to dodge Freddy, but ends up back in the creepy Elm Street house. Meanwhile, Taryn winds up in a sketchy alleyway. Freddy corners her, and she whips out flick knives, ready to rumble. She manages to stab him, but Freddy plays dirty. His fingers transform into syringes filled with a glowing blue substance. Taryn's old track marks start pulsating. It's super gross. Freddy injects her, and as she succumbs, he sneers, "What a rush!" Freddy's picking them off one by one, exploiting their deepest fears and weaknesses. The clock's ticking, and the gang's gotta think fast if they want to survive this nightmare. With Freddy terrorizing both the dream world and reality, it's a double-edged sword they need to face. Will finds himself in a creepy hallway where Freddy Krueger taunts him with a sinister wheelchair, reminding him he'll be back in it when he wakes up. Will tries to fight back using his wizard master powers, blasting Freddy with green energy. But Freddy's not having it. He dismisses Will's magic and ends his life. Meanwhile, Kristen reunites with Nancy and Kincaid. Using his super strength, Kincaid breaks through a wall to join them. They venture into Freddy's boiler room to rescue Joey, who's suspended over a fiery pit. Freddy appears, and after a tense confrontation, they manage to save Joey. They attack Freddy, but he reveals he's become stronger by absorbing the souls of his victims, showing off the screaming faces embedded in his torso. Then he vanishes, leaving them spooked. In the real world, Dr. Neil Gordon and Nancy's dad Donald find Freddy's remains in a junkyard, aiming to bury them on sacred ground. As they dig a grave, Freddy's skeleton comes to life and attacks them. Donald is killed, and Neil is knocked unconscious into the grave. Back in the dream world, the group searches for Freddy. They enter a hallway lined with mirrors. Freddy's reflections appear everywhere, grabbing them one by one. Joey, who hasn't spoken until now, screams no, shattering the mirrors and freeing his friends. They think it's over, but Freddy's not done. Nancy's father appears, claiming he's crossed over and wants to apologize. As Nancy embraces him, he morphs into Freddy and stabs her. Kristen tries to fight, but Freddy overpowers her. Just as he's about to finish her off, Nancy, wounded but determined, grabs Freddy's glove and impales him with his own blades. Meanwhile, Neil wakes up and continues the burial. He splashes holy water on Freddy's bones and places a crucifix on them, causing Freddy to glow and implode. In the dream, Freddy's engulfed in light and disappears, seemingly defeated. Nancy succumbs to her wounds, and Kristen vows to dream her into a peaceful place. At Nancy's funeral, the survivors mourn her loss. Neil spots the mysterious nun who reveals herself as Amanda Krueger, Freddy's mother, before vanishing. Realizing the connection, Neil understands the gravity of their battle. Later, Neil sleeps with a dream doll and Kristen's model of the Elm Street house by his side. As he drifts off, a light turns on inside the model house, hinting that Freddy might not be gone for good. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, 1988. So, Kristen, Joey, and Kincaid are finally out of the asylum and back to high school, trying to live normal lives. Kristen's made some new friends. Alice, a bright girl who's always daydreaming. Sheila, a smart but quiet girl with asthma. And Debbie, a tough girl who absolutely despises bugs. She's also dating Rick, Alice's brother, who's big into martial arts. But things start getting spooky again when Kristen begins having nightmares, feeling that Freddy Krueger might be back. One night, during a bad dream while exploring the old Elm Street house, she accidentally pulls Kincaid and Joey into her dream. The next day at school, they're not too thrilled and confront her about dragging them back into the nightmare world. Later, Kincaid wakes up to find himself trapped in a junkyard, the same place where Freddy's bones were buried. After his dog Jason does some digging and some other business, Freddy resurrects and kills Kincaid. That night, Joey meets a similar fate at Freddy's hands. Kristen freaks out when her friends don't show up at school and confides in Alice about her nightmares. After discovering Kincaid and Joey are dead, she, along with Rick, Dan, and Alice, visits the real Elm Street house. Rick fills Dan in on Freddy's backstory, and Alice mentions part of a Dream Master spell. She tells Kristen that she has control over her own dreams, but when Alice notices a chalk drawing of the house, something only Kristen could see before, they realize something's definitely off. That night, Kristen's mom gives her a sedative to help her sleep. Taking Alice's advice, Kristen tries to turn her nightmare into a pleasant dream. She meets a little girl named Alice building a sandcastle, hoping for a peaceful slumber. But of course, Freddy crashes the party. Kristen ends up in Freddy's boiler room, where he reveals that she's the last Elm Street kid and he needs her to reach new victims. As Freddy's about to finish her off, Kristen screams for Alice. Suddenly, Alice appears in the dream just as Freddy throws Kristen into the fire, killing her. Before she dies, Kristen sends her dream pulling power to Alice. But the power passes through Freddy first before reaching Alice. Now, with Kristen gone and Alice inheriting her abilities, things are about to get even more twisted. Freddy's got a new way to reach his victims, and Alice is unexpectedly caught in the middle. The nightmare isn't over. It's just getting started. Alice jolts awake, sensing that Kristen is in serious trouble. Sure enough, Kristen's room is engulfed in flames. As Alice tries to figure out what's happening and who this Freddy character is, her friends start dropping like flies. First, Sheila meets her end after Alice accidentally pulls her into a dream during a test where Freddy's waiting. The same fate befalls Rick later on. But after each friend's death, Alice absorbs their unique skills and dream powers. She's becoming Freddy's supernatural opposite, but she's not quite strong enough to take him down just yet. After Rick's death, Alice teams up with Dan Jordan, one of Rick's closest buddies. Together, they race to reach Debbie, their last surviving friend, before Freddy does. Little do they know, Freddy's pulling the strings, controlling their actions. He traps Alice and Dan in a time loop, and while they're stuck on repeat, Freddy gets to Debbie. He transforms her into a cockroach. Talk about a nightmare, and crushes her before Alice and Dan can intervene. Following a car accident where Dan is injured and rushed to the hospital, Alice heads home to prepare for the final battle with Freddy. Determined to save Dan, she falls asleep to join him before Freddy can finish him off. As they search for Freddy in the dream world, Dan gets hurt again. Alice wills him awake just as the doctors revive him, pulling him out of the nightmare. Left to face Freddy alone, Alice unleashes all the abilities she's gathered from her fallen friends. The battle is intense and fairly even, but Freddy's immortality gives him a brutal edge. Just when Freddy's about to deliver the final blow, boasting that he's guarded his gate too long to be defeated, Alice remembers the last verse of the Dream Master spell. For the first time, someone turns Freddy's evil back on himself. Using her new role as the guardian of good dreams, a role neither Kristen nor Nancy had, Alice releases the tortured souls Freddy had imprisoned. Freed, these souls make sure Freddy can't harm anyone anymore. His clothes fall lifelessly to the floor. Some time later, Dan and Alice are hanging out by a fountain. Alice tosses a coin and makes a wish. As they walk away, she keeps the wish to herself. But in the ripples of the fountain, Freddy's reflection appears. Looks like the nightmare might not be over after all. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, 1989. Almost a year after The Dream Master, Alice and Dan are dating, thinking Freddy Krueger is long gone. But weird stuff starts happening when Alice begins dreaming about a young nun named Amanda Krueger trapped in an asylum full of lunatics. Fresh out of high school, Alice and Dan plan a trip to Europe. Alice has some new buddies. Greta, who's training to be a supermodel, Yvonne, an aspiring Olympic diver, and Mark, comic book geek. On her way to work, Alice suddenly finds herself back at that creepy asylum. She's on a stretcher, screaming, and sees Amanda giving birth. The baby escapes, finds Freddy's clothes, and quickly morphs into the nightmare himself. Amanda tries to help, but Freddy slams the doors on her. Next thing Alice knows, she's at work, 4 hours late. Panicked, Alice calls Dan. He bails on his friends to meet her, but sleeps while driving. Freddy takes over, forcing Dan to crash into another vehicle. Alice witnesses this and faints in the middle of the street. She wakes up in the hospital with some big news. She's pregnant with Dan's child. While recovering, she meets a mysterious boy named Jacob. Yvonne later tells Alice there's no kids ward at the hospital, so who the heck is Jacob? Meanwhile, Freddy's back to his old tricks, offing Alice's friends as they sleep. He forces Greta to eat herself to death. Talk about a killer diet. When Freddy targets Mark, Alice pulls herself into Mark's dream to help, and he finally believes her. Desperate to figure things out, Alice gets an early ultrasound and has a chilling revelation. Freddy's using her unborn baby to invade her friend's dreams. She also discovers that Jacob is actually her unborn son. Now, Alice must find a way to stop Freddy from turning her child into his evil protege. It's a race against time to save her friends and her baby from becoming Freddy's next nightmare. While Alice is searching for Amanda Krueger's body, Yvonne gets ambushed by Freddy. She barely escapes thanks to a timely assist from Amanda's ghost and finally believes Alice wasn't just imagining things. Meanwhile, Mark stumbles upon a comic book that weirdly chronicles everything that's happened. He's sucked into his own nightmare where he sees Greta and discovers his dream power, the Night Prowler. He tries to take down Freddy but gets literally shredded, turned into a paper character and cut to pieces. Determined to end this nightmare, Alice sends Yvonne to the abandoned asylum, the Old Westin Hills, to free Amanda's soul. Alice dives into the dream world to rescue her unborn son, Jacob. Freddy traps her in a trippy MC Escher-like maze to slow her down. Just as she catches up to Jacob, Freddy hides inside her. Realizing he's been lurking within her all along, Alice forces him out, nearly sacrificing herself. Yvonne releases Amanda's soul and Amanda shows up to help. She instructs Jacob on how to defeat Freddy. Jacob uses the powers Freddy gave him to revert both himself and Freddy back into infants. Alice grabs baby Jacob and absorbs him back into herself. Baby Freddy tries to escape, but Amanda scoops him up and absorbs him back inside her. Freddy puts up a fight from within, but the church door slams shut, trapping him. Couple of months roll by. Alice gives birth to Jacob and finally gets some peace from all the nightmare chaos. In the final scene, those eerie kids from earlier show up, humming the classic 1-2 Freddy's Coming For You rhyme, dressed in church outfits. They're standing next to Alice, her dad, Yvonne, and baby Jacob. Just when things seem chill, Freddy's sinister laugh echoes, hinting that he might not be gone for good. Freddy's dead. The final nightmare. So, it's 1999 and a whole decade has passed since the last Freddy fiasco. Alice Johnson and her son Jacob have hightailed it out of Springwood, thinking they've left the nightmares behind. But, surprise, surprise, Freddy Krueger is back on the prowl and has taken out nearly every kid in town. There's only one teen left standing, known only as John Doe. In a weird dream, Freddy confronts John and knocks him straight out of Springwood's city limits. Funny thing is, the town borders act like some kind of magical barrier Freddy can't cross. When John gets ejected, he smacks his head on a rock and wakes up with zero memory. Doesn't know who he is or how he got there. Meanwhile, over at a shelter for troubled youth, we've got Spencer, Carlos and Tracy plotting their great escape. Carlos, who struggles with hearing issues due to his rough upbringing, and Spencer, who's sick of his dad's overbearing ways, are ready to bolt. Tracy, dealing with her own set of issues, is all in for the getaway. John gets picked up by the cops and ends up at the shelter under the care of Dr. Maggie Burrows. She spots a newspaper clipping about Springwood in his pocket. Thinking a trip down memory lane might help his amnesia, she decides to drive him back to Springwood. Little do they know, Spencer, Carlos and Tracy have stowed away in the van, hoping to make their own great escape. As they're cruising along, John has a wild hallucination and nearly wrecks the van just outside of Springwood, exposing the stowaways. With no other options, they all venture into the eerie, deserted town. Spencer, Carlos and Tracy try to bail, but find themselves stuck in a weird loop. They can't seem to leave Springwood no matter how hard they try. So, they decide to take a breather at an old, abandoned house. But get this, the place morphs into 1428 Elm Street, the old haunt of Nancy Thompson and Jesse Walsh. Meanwhile, John and Maggie poke around the local orphanage and stumble upon a shocking revelation. Freddy had a child. John's convinced he's the long-lost kid since Freddy let him live. Back at the spooky house, Carlos and Spencer accidentally doze off. Big mistake. They end up right in Freddy's nightmare playground, becoming his next targets. So Maggie wakes Tracy up, but John is still conked out in the dream world, trying to save Spencer. Maggie and Tracy decide to haul John back to the shelter. But on the way, Freddy snags John in his dream and kills him. Before biting the dust, John drops a bombshell. Freddy's kid is a girl. He shares this shocking news with Maggie just before he dies. Back at the shelter, things get weird. No one remembers John, Spencer, or Carlos, except for Doc, who's learned how to control his dreams. Maggie recalls what John told her and digs up her own adoption papers. Plot twist. She discovers she's Freddy's daughter. Doc figures out that Freddy's power comes from dream demons that keep reviving him. He also learns that the only way to off Freddy for good is to drag him into the real world. Maggie steps up to the plate, deciding she'll be the one to dive into Freddy's mind and pull him out. Entering the dream world, she slips on a pair of 3D glasses. Yeah, the movie went 3D at this point, and ventures into Freddy's twisted psyche. She uncovers his dark past, teased as a kid, abused by his foster dad, self-harm as a teen, and he even murdered his wife. Freddy made a deal with some fiery demons to become immortal. After some serious tussling, Maggie manages to yank Freddy back into the real world. They throw down in an epic hand-to-hand combat. Maggie uses weapons that were confiscated from the shelter's patients to fight him off. Fueled by anger over what she's learned, she strips Freddy of his infamous clawed glove. In the final battle, Maggie stabs Freddy in the stomach with his own glove. Doc tosses her a pipe bomb and she impales Freddy against a steel beam, stuffing the bomb into his chest. As she bolts away, Freddy looks straight into the camera and mutters, "Kids," before he explodes into smithereens. The 3 dream demons shoot out of Freddy as he's blown apart, unable to bring him back this time. With Freddy finally toast, Maggie turns to Tracy and Doc, flashes a grin, and declares, "Freddy's dead." Wes Craven's new Nightmare, 1994. Just like the first Nightmare flick started with Freddy creating his infamous glove, New Nightmare begins with the creation of an upgraded, even creepier version. The guy making the claws seems to chop off his own hand to attach them directly to his wrist, which makes the crew on set wince. Director Wes Craven urges the effects team to amp up the blood. Soon, he shouts, "Cut! Print that, Gretchen!" Meanwhile, Heather Logenkamp, her husband Chase, and their son Dylan are hanging around the set of the new Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But then, things get weird. The claw, which was just a prop a minute ago, comes to life and starts attacking and killing the special effects crew. Dylan suddenly disappears, and as the claw moves in to attack Chase, Heather screams, only to wake up in her own bed during an earthquake in Los Angeles. After the shaking stops, she notices Chase has scratches exactly like the ones he got in her dream. She's left wondering if the injuries came from the quake of her nightmare. Heather mentions she's been getting creepy phone calls from someone who sounds a lot like Freddy, but they'd stopped until now. That same day, Heather is a guest on a morning talk show discussing the 10th anniversary of the Nightmare films. As part of the surprise, Robert Englund bursts through a screen dressed as Freddy Krueger, which unsettles her a bit. Later, producer Bob Shea asks her to swing by his office at New Line Cinema. He explains that Wes Craven is working on a script for a new and final Nightmare movie. They want Heather to reprise her role as Nancy, but she's hesitant because of her recent nightmares, the disturbing calls, and her son's odd behavior. Bob also mentions that her husband Chase Porter is working on the film too. He's creating a new, scarier glove for Freddy, which doesn't exactly ease Heather's worries. When Heather gets home, her son Dylan has a creepy episode where he warns her in a voice that's not his own, "Never sleep again." Totally freaked out, she calls her husband Chase and begs him to come home. But on his way back, Chase sleeps at the wheel and dies in what's supposed to be a car crash. When Heather goes to identify his body, she spots claw-like marks on his chest, making her think there's more to his death than just an accident. Grieving and worried, she notices Dylan's behavior is getting even stranger. Desperate for answers, Heather reaches out to Wes Craven. He admits he doesn't know much more than she does, but tells her he's been dreaming scenes and writing them down each night. Wes explains that pure evil can be temporarily trapped if it's captured in a work of art that allows it to express itself. He says this evil has taken the form of Freddy Krueger because it's a familiar face. Freddy sees Heather as the gatekeeper, keeping him at bay since her character Nancy defeated him before. Now, Freddy's attacking her weakest points to break her down. Heather leaves, even more confused. After a quick nap in Dylan's room, Heather wakes up to find him missing. She rushes downstairs and finds him in another bizarre episode. Realizing things are spiraling, she takes Dylan to the hospital. A doctor asks if Dylan said anything during his trance, but Heather denies it. Later, the doctor presses her, and she admits Dylan has been doing Freddy-like actions and singing his creepy song. Julie, Dylan's babysitter, shows up at the hospital and confesses she had a nightmare about him too. When 2 nurses try to sedate Dylan, Julie, following Heather's instructions not to let him fall asleep, punches one nurse and threatens the other with a syringe. Fun fact, this nurse is played by Wes Craven's daughter. She then locks the door to keep them out. While Heather tries to leave the hospital, she's stopped by security guards who insist she speak with the doctor. The doctor suspects she's losing her grip on reality and pushes her to consider foster care for Dylan. Meanwhile, Dylan drifts off to sleep. In the locked hospital room, Freddy appears and in a chilling echo of Tina Gray's fate from the first film, brutally kills Julie, Dylan's babysitter. The nurses burst in and witness the horrifying scene. They panic and run, but Heather is laser-focused on finding Dylan, who's nowhere to be seen. The doctor starts to realize that Heather might have been right all along. Heather recalls telling Dylan that their house is just across the freeway from the hospital. She rushes outside and spots a giant Freddy dangling Dylan over the busy traffic. Desperate, she races home and finds Dylan, but things are far from normal. Freddy starts twisting reality around her. Heather begins to transform into Nancy, and her house morphs into the infamous Elm Street house. By forcing her into the role he wants her to play, Freddy fully manifests in the real world, emerging from Dylan's bed. Heather dashes into Dylan's room but finds him missing, and his toy dinosaur, the one he believed protected him, is destroyed. Determined to save her son, Heather takes sleeping pills to enter a lucid dream for a final showdown with Freddy. She finds herself in a steamy, water-soaked dreamscape, Freddy's home turf. Dylan reunites with her, but they're quickly attacked. Heather gets knocked out, leaving Dylan vulnerable. Freddy tries to lure Dylan into a trap, but Heather regains consciousness and jumps back into the fight. Freddy extends his tongue unnaturally, wrapping it around Heather's face to immobilize her. Showing bravery beyond his years, Dylan grabs a large kitchen knife Heather had brought and stabs Freddy's tongue, causing it to retract. Together, they outsmart Freddy by trapping him in a lit furnace. As he catches fire, reminiscent of the Hansel and Gretel tale, his true form is revealed amidst the flames. Heather and Dylan escape the burning lair, returning back to reality. Back at home, they find the script Wes Craven had been working on, waiting for them. Dylan asks his mom to read it to him. She begins, "We open on an old wooden bench. There is fire and tools and a man's grimy hands building what's soon revealed as a gleaming set of claws. And the claws are moving now as if awakening from a long and unwanted sleep." Freddy vs. Jason, 2003. So, in this one, Freddy Krueger is stuck in hell and furious. The parents of Springwood have figured out how to stop their kids from remembering him, leaving him powerless. Desperate to make a comeback, he finds Jason Voorhees in hell and, posing as Jason's mum, convinces him to rise again and head to Springwood to stir up some trouble. The plan? Jason does the killing, Freddy gets the blame, and fear of Freddy spreads, allowing him to escape. Jason makes his way to Elm Street and slips into the old house where Nancy Thompson and Jesse Walsh once lived, now home to Laurie Campbell and her widowed father. While Laurie and her friends Keir, Gib, Blake, and Trey are hanging out, Jason brutally murders Trey, folding him in half with his machete. The group gets hauled in for questioning. Laurie overhears some cops mentioning Freddy, and that night she falls asleep and dreams about him, giving Freddy a little boost in power. Freddy tries to attack Blake next, but realizes he can't harm him just yet. So he decides to sit back and let Jason have some fun. Blake wakes up to find his dad's severed head next to him and is then killed by Jason. The police, trying to avoid panic about Freddy, claim that Blake killed his father and then himself. Laurie keeps having nightmares about Freddy and tells Keir and Gib about them. She's reunited with her boyfriend Will Rollins and his friend Mark, who have escaped from Weston Hills Asylum after hearing about the murders on Elm Street. At a rave, Gib falls asleep and dreams of Freddy, who's taken the form of Trey to lure her in. Just as things get dangerous, Jason shows up and kills Gib and another party-goer, angering Freddy. He realizes Jason won't stop and that people are now more afraid of Jason than him. Jason goes on a rampage at the rave, taking out several more attendees. After escaping, Will, Laurie, Keir, and two other students, Freeberg and Lindemann, team up with a cop named Stubbs. They cook up a plan to stop Freddy and Jason. They'll lure Jason back to Camp Crystal Lake, and Laurie will pull Freddy into the real world to face off against Jason there. The idea is that Freddy will be vulnerable outside the dream world, and Jason, back on his home turf, will stick around and stop terrorizing Springwood. Freddy isn't thrilled with this plan. He kills Mark, leaving a bloody message on his back that says, "Freddy's back." Then he possesses Freeberg to prevent the group from taking Hypnosil, a drug that stops them from dreaming. Jason electrocutes Stubbs and then confronts Freddy, still in Freeberg's body, who injects Jason with tranquilizers. Before passing out, Jason slices Freeberg in half. Jason steps into Freddy's dream world and quickly realizes he's been played. He confronts Freddy, and at first, Freddy thinks Jason isn't scared of anything, which, combined with his real-world invincibility, makes him a tough nut to crack, even in dreams. But then, Freddy accidentally discovers that Jason has a fear of water. Seizing the moment, Freddy uses this fear to regress Jason back to his childhood, plunging him into a nightmare from his past where he starts to drown him. Just before Freddy can finish the job, Laurie enters the dream world and interrupts the showdown, causing Jason to wake up. Now at Crystal Lake, Jason lashes out and attacks the group. Enraged, Freddy tries to kill Laurie, revealing that he was the one who killed her mother. Laurie wakes up and pulls Freddy into the real world, dragging him into a burning cabin. Jason turns his attention to Freddy, who's momentarily stunned by his own fear of fire. Jason beats him up and hurls him through the cabin's flaming roof. Meanwhile, Laurie, Will, Keir, and Lindemann attempt to escape. Lindemann gets wounded and dies shortly after. Keir tries to protect Laurie and Will from Freddy, but gets killed suddenly by Jason. The epic battle between Freddy and Jason rages on, and Laurie decides she's sticking around until Freddy's gone for good. While Freddy can't match Jason's brute strength, he uses his speed to seriously injure him. During the fight, Laurie and Will ignite gas tanks at the docks, aiming to blow both Freddy and Jason sky high. By this point, Jason has lost 4 fingers and his eyes. As the fire spreads, Jason rips off Freddy's clawed arm, but not before Freddy stabs Jason in the heart with his own machete. The massive explosion sends both of them flying into the lake. Freddy resurfaces and makes a last attempt to kill Laurie with the machete. Just when it looks like it's game over, Jason, seemingly on his last leg, stabs Freddy with his own clawed arm before collapsing back into Crystal Lake. It's unclear if Jason did this to keep the fight going or to save Laurie for helping him earlier. Laurie grabs the machete as Freddy kneels helpless on the dock. She declares, "Welcome to my world, bitch," and beheads him, tossing the machete to Jason as he sinks beneath the water. Laurie and Will walk away, thinking it's all over. But the next morning, Jason emerges from the lake, holding his machete and Freddy's severed head. Freddy's head winks at the audience and lets out a maniacal laugh, leaving everyone wondering who really came out on top. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2010. Reboot. While chilling at the Springwood diner with his girlfriend, Chris Fowles, Dean Russell sleeps at the table. In his dream, he meets a creepy guy covered in burn scars, sporting a red and green sweater and a glove with claws. This burned man slits Dean's throat in the dream, but in reality, it looks like Dean is cutting his own throat as Chris and waitress Nancy Holbrook watch in horror. At Dean's funeral, Chris spots a photo of herself and Dean as kids, but she can't remember ever knowing him before high school. Soon enough, she starts dreaming about the same burned dude and is scared to catch any Z's. Her ex-boyfriend Jesse Braun shows up to keep her company, but Freddy appears in her nightmares and takes her out too. Covered in blood, Jesse races to Nancy's place to explain what happened and learns she's been having nightmares about the same man, Freddy. The cops arrest Jesse, suspecting him of Chris's murder. Unfortunately, Freddy gets to him when he falls asleep in his jail cell. With her friends dropping like flies, Nancy starts digging into how they're all connected, especially since none of them remember each other from before their teen years. She teams up with her friend Quentin Smith, and they discover that they and other kids all attended the same preschool back in the day. Nancy's mom, Gwen, reluctantly spills the beans. There was a gardener at the preschool named Fred Krueger who hurt Nancy and the other kids. She reveals that Nancy was his favorite and once came home talking about Freddy's magic cave and the messed up things that happened there. Gwen claims Krueger skipped town before the cops could nab him. Not buying it, Nancy tries to track down the other kids, only to find they've all been killed, most of them in their sleep. Realizing the horrifying truth, Nancy and Quentin piece together that Freddy is hunting them through their dreams. They need to find a way to stop him before they become his next victims. Quentin tries to shrug everything off as just buried memories, but during swim practice, he sleeps and witnesses what really went down with Krueger. He sees the parents hunting Freddy Krueger and burning him alive. Stunned, Quentin and Nancy confront his dad, Alan Smith, about them killing Krueger without solid proof he did anything wrong. Both battling insomnia and slipping into dreams while awake, they decide to head to the old preschool to uncover the truth about Krueger. On the way, Nancy nods off and gets attacked by Freddy. When Quentin wakes her up, they realize she's pulled a piece of Freddy's sweater into the real world. Quentin takes her to the hospital to treat her arm, and while they're there, he swipes some adrenaline to help them stay awake. They ditch the hospital and finally make it to the preschool. Quentin discovers Freddy's secret hideout and finds evidence that proves Krueger had been harming all the kids. Nancy figures the only way to end this nightmare is to pull Freddy out of their dreams and take him down in reality. Quentin tries to stay awake to pull Nancy out when she grabs Freddy, but he falls asleep and gets attacked himself. Freddy then goes after Nancy, revealing he left her for last, so she'd be so exhausted she'd never wake up once she finally crashed. As Nancy struggles with Freddy, Quentin wakes up and uses the adrenaline to jolt Nancy, pulling Freddy into the real world. With Freddy distracted by Quentin, Nancy grabs a broken paper cutter blade, chops off Freddy's gloved hand, and slashes his throat. Afterward, they set the place on fire with Freddy's body inside and make their escape. Later, Nancy and her mum return home from the hospital, and her mum suggests she get some sleep. But suddenly, Freddy appears in a mirror's reflection, kills her mum, and drags her body through the mirror while Nancy screams. And now that we've covered all the 9 movies, it's time to explore the comics I was earlier talking about. We begin with Nightmares on Elm Street. In 1990, Sybil Houch starts having intense nightmares about Freddy Krueger. She recognizes 1428 Elm Street in her dreams, the old house where her college roommate Nancy Thompson lived. Since Sybil is a ripperologist, she studies Jack the Ripper, Freddy twists himself into that infamous killer in her nightmares. Things get even more messed up when Freddy invades the dream of Priscilla Martin, another roommate of Nancy and Sybil, and murders her. Desperate to find Nancy, Sybil scours phone books, but comes up empty. She reaches out to Dr. Elizabeth Sims, who breaks the news that Nancy died 3 years ago, but suggests that Dr. Neil Gordon might have some answers. Sybil gives him a call. Suddenly, she feels dizzy, faints due to a drop in blood pressure, and slips into another dream. This time, she's forced to watch as Freddy kills her boyfriend, James. Just when Freddy's about to get her too, Nancy swoops in and saves her. Back in the real world, Dr. Gordon responds to Sybil's call about Freddy and shows up to help. Sybil fills him in about her dream encounter with Nancy. Together, they dive into Sybil's dreams. Nancy explains that thanks to Kristen Parker's dream powers, although she died physically 3 years ago, her soul ascended into the beautiful dream, a part of the dream world where Freddy can't touch her. She's been hiding Neil's dreams from Freddy to protect him. The two women realize that Freddy's likely using Sybil and Priscilla as bait to lure Nancy out of her safe zone. After some dangerous run-ins with Freddy in the dream world, they're rescued by a girl who tells Sybil that she's going to be her mother. Sybil's pregnant. The comic reveals there's a third dream plane where unborn children spend their time dreaming. These dream children gang up on Freddy, calling him out for trying to snatch Jacob earlier and telling him he doesn't belong there. But Sybil's troubles aren't over. She passes out again from morning sickness and dives straight into another nightmare. This time, Jack the Ripper is back, chasing her with a scalpel. She cries out for Nancy's help, but no luck. She's left to face the terror alone once more. Fast forward to 1995, 6 years after A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Alice Johnson rolls back into Springwood with her son Jacob in tow. Jacob isn't your average kid. He's got a sharp mind, maturity beyond his years, and psychic powers like telepathy. Sadly, Alice's dad, Dennis, called Fred here, has passed away, and it's hinted that Freddy had something to do with it. We learn that Sybil died from eclampsia, and Dr. Gordon, who was rushing her to the hospital, got into a car crash. Now, he's in a coma, constantly dreaming of Freddy trying to kill him, but Nancy keeps stepping in to protect him. Elm Street's looking like a ghost town. Most houses are boarded up and empty, with yet another joining the list. Alice reconnects with her old friend Yvonne Miller from The Dream Child, who's now a police officer. Enter Devon Gable, a mysterious and traumatized woman working for Freddy. He's gunning for Jacob again, but Jacob manages to rescue Alice when Freddy tries to manipulate Dan Jordan to trick her. Jacob then crosses paths with Devon. The two head to the Springwood Cemetery where Dan's buried, along with Devon's parents and sister. Jacob tries to use his powers to bring Dan back, but senses Freddy still has his soul. He zaps Devon and dives into her dreams, reliving her childhood traumas, and comes face to face with Freddy. Freddy tries to coax Jacob into helping him escape Springwood, offering to bring Dan back to life and even promising some father-son time with Dan's soul. Meanwhile, Freddy sends Devon on a deadly mission to kill Alice. Alice, in search of Jacob, had reached out to Yvonne at the hospital for help. They attempt to contact Nancy's spirit by speaking to Neil Gordon's comatose body. Jacob sensed earlier that Nancy was protecting him. Alice's words stir Neil, who tells her she needs to enter the dream world to connect with Nancy. She convinces Yvonne to sedate her. Just moments later, Devon storms into the hospital wielding a machine gun, wreaking havoc as she searches for Alice. But before Devon can get to her, Yvonne shoots her in the chest, stopping her cold. In the dream world, Alice meets up with Neil. Freddy tries to take them out by shattering all the glass in the dream church from the movies, but Nancy swoops in to save them. Alice transforms into her namesake, Alice in Wonderland, and encounters Freddy as a twisted version of the White Rabbit. Meanwhile, Nancy gets interrupted by the spirit of her father, Donald. Neil teams up with his former patients, the Dream Warriors, who are hanging out in a sort of pocket universe within the dream world. Jacob reunites with his dad, Dan Jordan's spirit, in the dream realm. Devon slips into a dying dream state and reconnects with Freddy in the dream world. Dan tells Jacob that Freddy will bring him back to life if Jacob helps Freddy escape from Springwood. Meanwhile, Donald, overwhelmed by Freddy's torment, shoots Nancy in the head. Freddy had promised Donald freedom from his suffering if he killed his own daughter. But Nancy isn't down for the count. She revives herself and tells her father she's changed and can offer him salvation. She frees the part of his soul that Freddy had imprisoned, sending his now whole spirit off to some unknown realm. Alice, on the other hand, is navigating more Alice in Wonderland-themed landscapes, but eventually gets overpowered by Freddy, who's morphed into the Jabberwocky. Neil leaves the Dream Warrior's pocket dimension and keeps pushing forward. Nancy tries to persuade Jacob not to help Freddy, reminding him that Freddy was the one who killed Dan in the first place. But now that she's in Freddy's domain, he's got power over her, too. Devon finally realizes Freddy was never going to keep his promises and that she was just a pawn in his game. She turns on him and teams up with Neil, Nancy, and Dan to take Freddy down. After they temporarily defeat Freddy, Jacob uses his psychic abilities to transfer his father Dan's spirit into Neil Gordon's body, even though Neil had wanted to join Nancy in the beautiful dream. The trio prepares to leave Springwood for good. Alice invites Yvonne to come with them and leave the nightmares behind once and for all. In the final panel, Freddy is shown piecing himself back together, hinting that he's not gone for good. A Nightmare on Elm Street special. Not long after the epic showdown between Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, Springwood, Ohio, turns into a full-on police state. The authorities are going overboard, doing everything they can to erase any trace of Freddy, hoping that'll keep him locked away for good. In Mr. Herbert's literature class, Lindsay Hudson dozes off and gets a visit from none other than Freddy Krueger himself. When she snaps awake, she freaks out, telling everyone that the infamous killer is haunting her dreams. Suddenly, officers in black suits storm in and drag her out of class. After school, her friend Emily fills in Sandy and Lindsay's brother Alex about what's going on, and they hatch a plan to rescue her. They tail the mysterious men and find out Lindsay's been taken to Westin Hills Psychiatric Facility. Emily and Alex break in, leaving Sandy outside to keep watch. Bad move. Sandy falls asleep and Freddy gets to her too. The cops arrive just in time to find her body. Inside Westin Hills, Emily and Alex find Lindsay fast asleep. They watch helplessly as Freddy kills her in her dreams. As hospital staff try to apprehend them, Emily snaps photos, hoping to expose the truth to the world. Devastated by his sister's death, Alex slips away and hides in a medicine closet, desperately searching for his ADHD meds since he left his Ritalin at home. But he grabs the wrong bottle, sleeping pills. He nods off and, well, yep. You guessed it, Freddy slaughters him too. Wandering deeper into the facility, Emily stumbles upon a room packed with teenagers, including some of her missing friends, all in hypnosil-induced comas. The staff corners her, trying to explain away what she's seen. Security guards restrain her, and one of the staff injects her with a tranquilizer, knocking her into a dream state. This gives Freddy the opening he needs to finish her off. After Emily's death, the Westin Hills staff think they've nipped the problem in the bud. But the story wraps up with Freddy grinning wickedly and proclaiming, "It's great to be back." Freddy Krueger's A Nightmare on Elm Street. An ambulance rushes to the home of Roger and Patty Hayes. They found their daughter Allison barely alive in her bed, slashed and bruised with no clues about who attacked her. Meanwhile, Dr. Julianne Quinn is gearing up to leave New York City and her boyfriend Doug behind. She's headed back to her hometown of Springwood, Ohio, where she's landed a job at Westin Hills Psychiatric Hospital. As she drifts off to sleep, she has a nightmare about Freddy Krueger, but wakes up when a cigarette accidentally sets her bed on fire, forcing her to quickly put it out. Over at Springwood Medical Center, Freddy goes after Allison again while she's in surgery. But this time, she fights back, leading the doctors to note that her body tried to die, but her mind wouldn't let it happen. Julianne flies to Springwood, studying Freddy's file on the way. She reads about Amanda Krueger and the horrific event she endured at the Our Lady of Sorrows Institution for the Mentally Ill, the place that later became Westin Hills. Even on the plane, Julianne starts having nightmares about Freddy, but uses mental tricks to keep him from killing her, well, at least for now. Once she arrives, the nightmares don't let up. Julianne is assigned to be Allison's doctor, and to Allison's relief, she's the only one who truly gets what she's going through. Together, they dive into the dream world, where they come face to face with Freddy himself. Freddy almost takes Julianne out, but Allison turns herself into a blazing fireball, keeping him at bay just long enough for them both to wake up. Afterward, while Allison is at Springwood Hospital, Julianne puts her on Hypnosil to suppress the nightmares. When Julianne meets with Dr. Marlin, he tells her that once Allison moves to Westin Hills Psychiatric Hospital, she can't stay on Hypnosil because of some scandal that went down there 3 years ago. Back at home, Julianne plans to shower before hitting the sack, but she's actually already fallen asleep. She suddenly finds herself in the Oval Office, and who's sitting in the president's chair? Yep, Freddy himself. She tries to bolt, but is too wiped out. Freddy shows up again and stabs her in the stomach, pointing out that her big mistake was focusing so much on keeping Allison safe that she let her own guard down. Allison is heartbroken by Julianne's death and vows to get revenge on Freddy. Dr. Whatley steps in as her new doctor, but Allison shuts him out, thinking spilling the beans won't help anyway. She mentally gears up for a showdown, imagining herself with gear and a glove, just like Freddy's. She confronts him, but he pulls a fast one on her, causing her to attack Dr. Whatley while she's sleepwalking, thinking he's Freddy. Whatley, thinking she's a danger, orders her to be sedated and moved to the secure ward. Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash. Set in December 2008, 5 years after the epic clash in Freddy vs. Jason and 16 years after Army of Darkness, we catch up with Will Rollins and Laurie Campbell as they return to Crystal Lake, seeking closure. But surprise, surprise, Jason isn't feeling so forgiving. He kills them shortly after their arrival and drags their decomposed bodies back to his creepy shack in the woods. While holed up in his shack, Jason slips into a trance. Freddy Krueger and Jason's mother, Pamela, though it's really Freddy in disguise, appear to him. Freddy is currently trapped and powerless inside Jason's mind, but he learns about the Necronomicon hidden in the old Voorhees house, a book that can resurrect him. Freddy and the foe Pamela convince Jason that if he fetches the Necronomicon, he can become a real boy. Meanwhile, Ash Williams gets called over to the new Crystal Lake S-Mart to share his retail wisdom with a bunch of teenage slackers. While he's there, he mistakes one of Jason's nearby murders for the handiwork of Deadites. Later, he tails a group of teens to the Voorhees house where he stumbles upon the Necronomicon just before Jason shows up and slaughters the teens. Back at S-Mart, Ash and the employees cook up a plan to deal with Jason. But things go south fast when Jason crashes the party, wipes out most of the staff and bolts with the evil book. Freddy uses the Necronomicon to restore his full powers and even boosts Jason's intelligence. Later, when Ash and the remaining crew are catching some Z's at Carolyn's house, Freddy invades their dreams. Classic Freddy move. Ash and his motley crew of S-Mart survivors confront Freddy and Jason at the Voorhees home. Freddy's already unleashed the Necronomicon's full power, giving him reality warping abilities. With his new brain power, Jason turns against Freddy, trying to snag the Necronomicon for himself. In the ultimate showdown between these horror heavyweights, Freddy resurrects all of Jason's past victims from the Friday the 13th series as Deadites to attack both Jason and Ash. He even transforms the Voorhees house into the infamous Elm Street home. But in the end, Ash, with a little help from his co-workers, manages to outsmart them. He uses the Necronomicon to open a portal, banishing Freddy to the Deadite world, while Jason and the book end up trapped beneath a frozen crystal lake. So, yeah, Ash saves the day and the nightmare gets put on ice, literally. Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, Nightmare Warriors sequel. A squad of government agents, led by director Gordon Russell, is digging up Crystal Lake to find the Necronomicon Ex Mortis for their hush-hush Project Black Book. Russell grabs the book and takes off, leaving the rest to dive underwater for Jason Voorhees' body. Big mistake. Jason wakes up and slays them all. Egged on by Freddy Krueger posing as his mum, Jason sets off to track down Ash Williams, jumping ahead 6 months to June 2009. Ash is kicking back in Franklin, Michigan with his girlfriend Carolyn, thinking his monster-fighting days are behind him. While getting ready for a backyard barbecue, Dr. Maggie Burroughs shows up trying to recruit him for a group that she and Dr. Neil Gordon started for people who have faced unnatural evils. Ash isn't having it and sends her packing, then heads out to grab party supplies, leaving Carolyn alone. Elsewhere, Stephanie Campbell and Alice Johnson start experiencing eerie visions of Jason and Freddy. Jason, continuing his killing spree, attacks and murders Carolyn. Ash returns to find Carolyn's body and flees as the cops arrive, oblivious to a guy in a Hummer watching him. Over at the Pentagon, Russell is unveiling his plans to create an army of demonic soldiers using the Necronomicon. He combines modern tech with the book to pull an unburned, seemingly powerless Freddy Krueger out of the Deadites realm and back to Earth. Ash hops on a train to Baltimore, Maryland, aiming to find Maggie and her group. Jason isn't far behind, hitching a ride in the boxcar. Stephanie, her father Stephen, Alice, and her son Jacob show up at Maggie and Neil's house, where Tina Shepard and Rennie Wickham are already staying. When Ash arrives, Maggie gets everyone settled and starts explaining their mission. But their meetup gets crashed, literally, when Jason bursts through the door and kills Stephen. As Ash grabs his weapons, the mysterious man in the Hummer plows through the wall and slams into Jason. The whole crew makes a run for it, and their savior introduces himself. Tommy Jarvis, Jason's oldest foe. Looks like like the gang's all here for another round against evil. Government agents roll up to Maggie and Neil's place and manage to bring Jason down using bullets and missile. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew holes up at a motel. Maggie suggests they pay a visit to her father, Gordon Russell, maybe her adoptive dad, to get the Necronomicon and take down the killers. Not buying it, Tommy decides to ditch the group and go solo. Over at the Capitol, Jason gets locked up in a holding cell packed with deadites. Freddy reaches out to Jason telepathically, pitching a plan to team up and wreak havoc on the world. Jason agrees, especially when he learns his old enemies, including Tommy, are gunning for them. Freddy makes Jason the general of his deadite army, fixes up his decayed body and brings him back to life just as he was before Tommy took him down. Meanwhile, our heroes, minus Stephanie and Jacob, who stay back at the motel, head to the Capitol but end up getting thrown in the slammer. Only Maggie, Neil, and Rennie are spared as Russell takes them to meet Freddy. Freddy morphs back into his charred, demonic self and spills the beans that he's fused with the Necronomicon and now wields all its powers. Russell tries to take Freddy down with his own glove, but Maggie flips the script, turning the blades on him and taking him out. She then drops a bombshell. She's actually Freddy's daughter, Catherine Krueger, and she goes after Neil and Rennie. Tina senses Rennie's death through a psychic jolt and uses her telekinetic powers to bust out of a cell. She teams up with Ash and Alice, and as they make their getaway, Jason and his deadite army unleash chaos on Washington. Ash, Tina, and Alice take on and trash a Freddy-controlled robot to snag the Necronomicon. Meanwhile, Tommy faces off against Jason in the streets of DC, where Jason and the deadites are wreaking havoc. As Tommy unloads on his old nemesis, he's ambushed by winged deadites who haul him off to Freddy. Back at the motel, Jacob and Stephanie drift off to sleep, and Freddy seizes the chance to possess Stephanie. Under Freddy's control, she seduces and attacks Jacob, making him cry out for his mum. Alice hears her son's pleas and taps into her Dream Master powers to pull herself, Ash, and Tina into Jacob's nightmare. Freddy immobilizes Ash during the scuffle, then gruesomely flays Stephanie alive and makes off with Jacob. Still inside the dream world, Tina and Alice manage to restore Stephanie's skin, and she wakes up without a scratch. Over at the White House, Freddy, Jason, and Maggie are holding Tommy and Jacob captive. Freddy, posing as the president, goes on national TV to announce his twisted new policy: no kid left alive, and brags about the chaos he's about to unleash worldwide. After catching Freddy's broadcast, Ash and the gals break into a local pawn shop to load up on weapons, then make tracks to the White House. As blood literally pours from the skies over Washington, Ash, Alice, Tina, and Stephanie are plotting their way into the White House. Fed up with Ash and Alice's constant squabbling, a shaken Stephanie wanders off on her own. Their big break comes when a battalion of soldiers rolls in to rescue the president, creating the perfect distraction. Tanks, choppers, and fighter jets clash with the deadites, but the troops take a heavy beating. Freddy pops up in the clouds, blasting helicopters out of the sky like it's nobody's business. Meanwhile, Stephanie faints and slips back into the dream world. She finds herself at a church where Freddy, posing as a priest, tells her it's her destiny as a member of the Voorhees clan to become a killer, like Jason. Donning her own hockey mask, Stephanie leaves the church ready to embrace her fate and take down her uncle. Back at the White House, Maggie and Jason are duking it out when Ash crashes into the room driving a tank. Yeah, a tank, and takes out Maggie, which really ticks off Freddy. As Ash rescues Neil, Jacob, and Tommy, Alice steps up to face Freddy one-on-one. She drops the bomb that she's terminally ill and her Dream Master powers are fading. To pass her abilities to Jacob, she lets Freddy kill her. As she dies, she releases the souls of all the people Freddy has offed over the years. Jacob, furious over his mom's death, declares himself the new Dream Master, surrounded by the spirits of Amanda Krueger and the Dream Warriors. Amanda and the other souls manage to wipe out the deadite army, but Freddy isn't having it. He cuts off their link to Earth by dealing Jacob a critical blow. While Tina tends to Jacob and Ash tangles with Freddy, Tommy decides it's time to settle things with Jason. They go head-to-head in a brutal fight, with Tommy taunting Jason for never managing to finish him off. Just then, Stephanie shows up and drives a machete into Jason's back. This gives Tommy the opening to stab Jason in the head with a piece of glass. But Freddy twists the wind by absorbing Jason's soul to amp up his own power. Neil is scrambling to read passages from the Necronomicon to banish Freddy. He's joined by the spirit of Nancy Thompson, Freddy's original nemesis. Together, they chant the words to open the deadite dimension. Freddy fights against the vortex, but the Necronomicon itself deems him unworthy and strips away his powers. Reduced to his human form, Freddy pleads for mercy, claiming the demonic force messed with his head. Ash isn't buying it. Without hesitation, he blasts Freddy into the vortex with his shotgun, saying he never expected a storybook ending anyway. It's likely that once Freddy lands back in the Deadite realm, they finish him off for good. Nancy bids farewell to Neil and rejoins the other spirits. Around the same time, we see Jason's iconic mask split in half by Tommy's rock, with his mother's voice whispering that he can never truly die. The next morning, Ash decides he's earned a vacation in Texas. He says his goodbyes to Tommy, Tina, Neil, Jacob, and Stephanie, handing over the reins to Tommy as the new leader of the Nightmare Warriors. Later on, we flash back to Springwood in 1964. A disoriented Agent Wesley Carter got sucked into the Necronomicon's vortex, finds himself inside the Springwood Police Department on the day Fred Krueger is arrested. On a whim, he signs Krueger's search warrant after spotting the file on a desk. This small act changes history, preventing the legal loophole that would have turned Krueger into the monster we know. Talk about a game changer. Now, there were a few more comics that served as sequels to certain Freddy movies, but I believe it's not entirely important to explore that for the sake of the video. So now, let's dive into the TV show. Freddy's Nightmares. So, after the Nightmare on Elm Street movie scared the pants off everyone, New Line Cinema wanted to bring Freddy Krueger to TV with Freddy's Nightmares. But since Freddy's a serial killer who loves his work a little too much, they couldn't have him slashing up a regular cast every week, otherwise they'd run out of characters real quick. So they went with an anthology format, introducing new folks in each episode. Each episode dives into a different dark or grim story set in the eerie town of Springwood, Ohio, specifically on Elm Street. While Freddy occasionally pops up in the plot, most stories don't involve him directly, but his creepy influence is always lurking in the background, making things just a tad more unsettling. Freddy's main job in the show is as the host, kinda like the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt. He kicks off and wraps up each episode with ominous or sometimes cheeky comments, adding that extra layer of dread. A cool twist in the series is its two-part story approach. Most episodes feature two stories, each taking up half the episode. The second story usually zooms in on a minor character from the first, giving us a deeper dive into their twisted tale. In the second season, some episodes form mini-arcs, where events from one episode spill over into the next. For example, Interior Loft gets a direct sequel with Interior Loft Later, and Lucky Stiff is followed up by Easy Come, Easy Go. Fun fact, Torrance High School was used as the filming location for Springwood High School. Horror buffs might recognize it from later shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, let's explore the 7 best episodes from the show. The Art of Death, Season 1, Episode 18. Jack's been having a tough time. He's a bit of an oddball with a secret crush on Joan. He spends his days sketching cartoons of her from afar. When Joan's boyfriend catches wind of this, he bullies Jack relentlessly. In retaliation, Jack draws an unflattering cartoon of the boyfriend for the school newspaper, which only amps up the tension. To cope with the stress, Jack creates a character called the Phantom, but things get freaky when the Phantom seems to come to life and starts doing Jack's bidding. The Phantom traps the claustrophobic Joan in a locker, causing her major distress. But Joan's nightmare doesn't end there. Her roommate's friend pressures her for every juicy detail of the incident, adding to her anxiety. This episode is definitely unsettling. While the low-budget vibes don't hold up as well as the original movies, it's still a wild ride into obsession and revenge. Lucky Stiff, Season 2, Episode 6. Talk about a messy affair. In this episode, a woman's fling leads to her husband finding out. The shock gives him a heart attack, and he dies. Riddled with guilt, she doesn't have much time to grieve because her new guy wins the lottery. You'd think that's good news, but in Freddy's world, luck can be a real curse. Meanwhile, a gravedigger is head over heels for the widow and is willing to resort to blackmail to win her over. The suspense in this episode is off the charts, giving off some serious Hitchcock vibes. If more episodes had this level of tension, well, the show might have become a classic alongside The Twilight Zone. Sister's Keeper, Season 1, Episode 7. Twin sisters and Freddy Krueger? Now we're talking. Unlike most episodes where Freddy just bookends the story, this one's all about him. This episode's actually the second part of a two-parter. The first showed Freddy's arrest and fiery demise. In Sister's Keeper, the twin daughters of the cop who caught Freddy are being haunted by him in their dreams. The twist? Well, when one sister gets hurt in her dream, the other gets the injury in real life. They decide to team up and use this strange connection to take Freddy down. This is classic Nightmare on Elm Street material. Fans often wonder if the show would have had more gems like this if it had kept going. Easy Come, Easy Go, Season 2, Episode 14. Freddy kicks off this episode with his usual flair. While the movies are known for horror, this episode leans more into mystery and thrills. We meet Greta, a woman who ropes in a friend to help bump off her new husband. Things get complicated when Greta's sister and brother-in-law show up unexpectedly. Greta's not exactly a saint. She'd fit right in as a villain in a Hitchcock film. Well, as you might guess, karma isn't on her side and things spiral out of control. It's not your typical Freddy tale, but it's a gripping episode that keeps you guessing till the end. A Family Affair, Season 2, Episode 19. This one's packed with twists and turns. Paul, an attorney, is cheating on his wife with an unstable woman named Claire. Realizing he's made a huge mistake, he tries to end the affair and focus on his family. But Claire doesn't take rejection well. She threatens to expose him and even harm his loved ones. Desperate to protect his family, Paul hires someone to take Claire out of the picture. What follows is a suspenseful chain of events where you never know what's coming next. Just when you think things might end well, bam! Remember, happy endings are rare on Elm Street. Photo finish, Season 2, Episode 4. Freddy's back in action in this episode. A struggling photographer is trying to revive her career, but when the models from her latest shoot start getting terrorized by Freddy in their dreams, things go south fast. Desperate for help, she makes a deal with Freddy himself. But as always, his assistance comes with a hefty price. To make matters worse, some FBI agents are snooping around Springwood and Freddy isn't thrilled about it. It's always a treat seeing Freddy play a bigger role, even if some of his one-liners are a bit cringy by today's standards. Do you know where your kids are? Season 2, Episode 10. This episode nails the trifecta: thrilling, horrifying, and suspenseful. We follow a babysitter who's in for the shock of her life. The child she's watching, played by the same actress, is actually a murderous little terror who escapes and swaps places with her. What follows is a nail-biting game as both the real babysitter and the imposter try to convince the mother who's who. The suspense is so intense it could have been its own standalone film. Add in Freddy's snarky commentary and you've got one heck of an episode that's a fan favorite for a reason. Finally, let's explore Freddy's powers and weaknesses. As long as his victims are catching some sleep, Freddy Krueger can jump into their dreams and twist them to his own wicked ends. He can even slip into someone's mind if they're drunk or stoned. Talk about a buzzkill. Any damage he dishes out in the dream world hits hard in reality too, though how that happens changes from film to film. This lets him stack up the body count pretty easily. Freddy loves messing with his prey by changing his appearance and surroundings. He even morphs into the boiler room where he took his missing child victims. Creepy, right? He can control or possess anything in the dream environment that's not kept exclusively on his victim, as shown in the 5th and 6th movies. The more people know and fear him, and the more souls he holds, the stronger Freddy gets. When he's at full power, he can wreak serious havoc in the real world. This includes possessing humans, like in the second Nightmare flick, briefly in the 5th, and in Freddy vs. Jason, his own corpse, as in the 3rd film, objects, or even animals, also seen in the 2nd film. He can even pull someone from the waking world into the dream world, as shown in the 5th movie. If a victim wakes up while grabbing onto Freddy in a dream, they can drag him into the real world. Here, he's still super strong and tough, but he can be hurt, setting the stage for some epic showdowns in the 1st movie, Freddy's Dead and Freddy vs. Jason. Inside someone's dream, Freddy can peek into their mind and use their deepest fears and quirks against them. That's his signature move. Sometimes he'll take on the image of previous victims to lure friends or relatives to their doom. A few folks have tried to fight back using lucid dreaming, but Freddy usually keeps the upper hand. One of his nastiest tricks is absorbing the souls of his victims, making himself even more powerful. As he claims each soul, their face appears on his chest, boosting his abilities. Every soul he takes gives him the skills of that person. He's picked up martial arts skills and high durability this way. Plus, he's a shapeshifter. He can turn into anything, like a cockroach. He can use this power on others too. In The Dream Master, he kills Debbie by transforming her into a cockroach and squashing her in a roach motel. Weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Freddy isn't invincible though. If he doesn't have enough power, like when people forget about him, he's pretty much stuck in hell and can't harm anyone, whether they're awake or asleep. A scene in Freddy vs. Jason. His mother is another thorn in his side. She can even match or even suppress his powers, trapping him for a long time. No wonder he's scared of her and tries to keep her soul locked away. He can also be temporarily defeated if his remains are laid to rest by a priest using holy water. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, we see that if someone grabs him in a dream and wakes up, they can pull him into the real world. This catches him off guard and weakens him, making him vulnerable. In the real world, he's still super strong, but he can be hurt or even killed. Freddy's own fingerknives can be turned against him if he's distracted. Talk about cutting it close. He's also afraid of fire, which is highlighted in Freddy vs. Jason. Additionally, he's spooked by Jack Henry Dappen due to his holy powers. Freddy has a bad habit of toying with his favorite victims or gloating too much. This arrogance sometimes gives his targets a chance to fight back. He also struggles to kill those with strong wills and control over their dreams, like the Dream Warriors, the Dream Child, or even Jason Voorhees. This only fuels his frustration, making him openly swear and lose his cool. The cultural impact of Freddy Krueger and his adventures beyond Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, the notorious dream-stalking slasher, didn't just haunt the big screen. He popped up in all sorts of places you might not expect. Theme parks and Halloween haunts. Back in 1988, Freddy headlined Six Flags St. Louis Fright Fest, which was called Fright Nights then. He was such a hit that for the next 2 years he got his own haunted house called Freddy's Nightmare, the haunted house on Elm Street. Freddy didn't stop there. He teamed up with fellow horror icons Jason Voorhees and Leatherface during Halloween Horror Night 17 at Universal Orlando Resort and Universal Studios Hollywood. He made another spooky appearance with Jason at Halloween Horror Nights 25. And in 2016, Freddy and Jason joined forces once more to terrify guests at Halloween Horror Nights in Hollywood. Pop culture cameos. Freddy's made some unexpected appearances on TV too. On Robot Chicken, voiced by Seth Green, he moved into a house with other slasher legends like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, Pinhead, and Ghostface in a skit called Horror Movie Big Brother. In The Simpsons episode Treehouse of Horror 6, groundskeeper Willie took on Freddy's role. After accidentally getting set on fire thanks to Homer's antics and being ignored by the townspeople, Willie seeks revenge on their kids in their dreams. He's ultimately defeated when Maggie plugs up his bagpipe spider form, causing him to inflate and explode, though it's hinted he might still be lurking around, just less menacing. Believe it or not, in 1992, Freddy appeared unlicensed in a Belarusian children's film called Keshki I Freddy, directed by Boris Berzner. The story follows Keshka, a kid reminiscent of Tom Sawyer who skips his English lessons to watch A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, at a cultural center. Falling asleep during the movie, he wakes up to eerie sights and sounds. In the basement, Freddy emerges from a torn poster and asks Keshka if he speaks English. When Keshka can't answer, Freddy ominously offers to teach him English and chases him. Cornered, Keshka recites the laws of the pioneers of the Soviet Union while giving a pioneer salute. This weakens Freddy, allowing Keshka to snap off his glove blades with pliers and file them down. Waking up, Keshka decides it's probably a good idea to focus on his English studies, holding Freddy's hat as a memento. Gaming appearances. Freddy's first venture into video games was in 1989 with a Commodore 64 title called A Nightmare on Elm Street, published by Monarch and developed by Westwood Associates. This was followed by a 1990 NES game of the same name, published by LJN Toys and developed by Rare. In 2011, Freddy joined the roster of Mortal Kombat as a downloadable character, with Robert Englund reprising his iconic role. He was only the second non-Mortal Kombat character to appear in the game. In this version, Freddy attacks Shao Kahn for stealing the souls he intended to claim. During their battle, he's pulled into the game's version of the real world. Injured but undeterred, Freddy equips 2 razor gloves to continue the fight. After defeating Khan, Nightwolf sends him back to the Dream Realm, where he goes right back to haunting people's nightmares. Ed Boon, co-creator of Mortal Kombat, mentioned that Freddy's inclusion made sense due to his violent nature and fame. They tossed around ideas of including other horror legends like Jason, Michael Myers, and Leatherface, but Freddy got the nod, opening doors for more unexpected characters in the future. Freddy later appeared in the mobile version of Mortal Kombat X, teaming up with Jason from Friday the 13th. In October 2017, the Jackie Earle Haley version of Freddy was added to the horror game Dead by Daylight as a downloadable character, along with Quentin Smith. The game's chapter picks up right after Nancy Holbrook escapes Freddy. Seeking revenge, Freddy targets Quentin, invading his dreams and luring him to the Bedham preschool, where an unforeseen force pulls them into the Dead by Daylight universe. TV comebacks and other oddities. Freddy made a surprise return to television in an episode of The Goldbergs titled Mr. Knifey Hands, with Robert Englund slipping back into the striped sweater for a cameo. He also showed up as an avatar in the movie Ready Player One. In the chaotic world of Planet Doom, he's one of the many characters battling it out, only to be taken down by H. On a quirky note, the frog species Lepidopterobacus laevis earned the nickname Freddy Krueger frog because of its aggressive behavior. Guess even frogs can be scary. And in 2023, a prehistoric parasitoid wasp was named for Acanthus freddy Krugeri in Freddy's honor. Scientists thought the wasp's long claws and aureolum were a perfect match for the infamous slasher's trademark glove. So, Freddy Krueger's influence stretches far beyond Elm Street, creeping out into theme parks, TV shows, video games, and even science. So yeah, that was all in this video. See you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.